Yeah, thanks for having us. And as Angela said, we're looking forward to have a conversation. And we put a bunch of material in there and had kind of fun thinking that this might be an audience who also has an interest in some more of like the detail of the analytics. So yeah, if you, we're looking forward to the questions and conversation.
Absolutely, yeah. Could I ask a few questions to get started maybe? How many of you guys are in blockchain full time? Wow, it's intimidating. And how many of you are developers? A lot, most of the room, yeah.
I have a final question. How many of you are somehow active in analytics, web analytics?
Yeah.
Research? Okay, thank you.
Great.
Okay, do you want to take it? Or should...
You can take it.
Okay, so for intros, my name is Arthur. I'm the head of growth at Foam. Yeah, I work at Foam since 1.5, 2 years. I started with marketing and am now responsible for a bunch of stuff, but specifically in this context, I work a lot on, let's say, non-economic incentives, meaning gamification, NFT incentives, work with Caleb on stuff like leaderboards and stuff like that. And we'll go more into that. And yeah.
Yeah. So my name's Caleb. I'm a co-founder of Blocklytics. We're a data services company for blockchain products. My background is in product analytics, specifically for managing mobile games. And I'm bringing some of that experience over to blockchain. I was introduced to it a few years ago and just can't get enough, really. So I'm really honored to speak here and kind of share some of our data with you guys. I really hope that you have questions and kind of we can all think together about what other answers we should be finding out of the Foam protocol data.
So basically the presentation we prepared walks through first the Foam app, which is a kind of web application, a Web3 application we launched and have some data on. We're going to look at the performance of that web application. Going to look at some new incentives that we've added on top of, like the, let's say, the cryptoeconomic incentives. We're going to talk about the community on top of that and how we're working to prevent information asymmetry, so we allow everyone to participate in this network. And then finally, we're going to very shortly touch on next steps and kind of how we will allow through governance dashboards and more curation tools and more analytics to allow the community to themselves change this deployed kind of Web3 application. And we have a grant program to support innovation on that side as well. So I'll start quickly talking about Foam. Foam is a New York-based blockchain startup. We started, as I said, with the kind of this project 1.5, 2 years ago, when I also started working there. We have two main kind of focus points. The first is the Foam map, which I'll be talking mainly about today. The second one is Foam location, which is a kind of radio protocol we're working on, which is a more, let's say, a long-term project with a heavy development track. Most of our team is working on that on location in New York right now. The idea is how can you prove in a Byzantine fault-tolerant system of radios that something is somewhere at a certain time and space. We're not going to talk any more about this, but it's important to touch upon that this is kind of the main research track. And before that, and kind of we've also launched kind of a Web3 application that is both a front-end kind of visualizer for blockchain data on the map, but also we're working on basically having native data, like spatial data, or places specifically, which is a category, a subset of spatial data, native on the blockchain, and having a TCR for validating and verifying that data. If you want to step in at any point. Caleb has been very involved throughout the process, so I'm also confident that Caleb can probably correct me on a lot of things. I'm very looking forward to that. But basically, I don't know if you know apps like there are existing services like OpenStreetMap, which is a kind of Wikipedia for places. They're great. They're a great tool, and they're similar to Wikipedia. They're all crowdsourced and they work well for many use cases. They don't work that well for a certain subset category of places, which is called point of interest, which is every time you take an Uber, for example, the thing that autofills, that's taken from Foursquare point of interest, for example. And in crowdsourced systems, keeping those points of interest up to date and accurate is very demanding, and it doesn't really work in open source systems. So what you have is commercial entities that kind of deal with the verification of that. And we thought that this might be a great use case for a token-curated registry, that you have basically this crowdsourced data set, and then you have a verification model on top of that for something that is at least slightly objective, we talk about the edge cases of that assumption, but that is objective. Is that thing there or not, right? So anyone can add a place. So let's say you add a coffee shop around the corner, and then you have a community around the TCR that works on the verification. And then the result is basically having a bunch of locations, and we'll talk about how many we have soon, on the blockchain itself that can be referenced then by any application that wants to reference space. So the way it works right now is this is a Web3 application. You're logged in with MetaMask. We want to place this location where we're at today. You enter the information, you sign with MetaMask, and you have it in the application. It's a pretty simple process. What you have on top of that for the verification as well is that you, this is a similar thing, right? You add a POI, you add a deposit. That is the stake that is removed, that is the risk involved in participating, which also guarantees validity. Then you have a voting process, or someone can challenge if they want. If someone challenges the point, the initial stake is used, is part of what's called a prize pool for a vote, similar to a normal TCR. People can vote, and then the original prize pool is distributed among the winners. And then in the end, either the POI is removed from the map or stays on the map. And then you have basically a binary outcome with like an incentive design that wants to produce as good of a map objectively, which is of course a different thing, but as possible.
Yeah, and this incentive design needs really 3 people to do it. You need the original cartographers who add the points. And then you need the challengers who challenge the validity of the points and stake tokens against them. And then you also need the voters themselves to vote on the outcome of those challenges. And so the model is really specifically designed that the cartographer adds a deposit, so to incentivize challengers. Challengers add a deposit to incentivize voters. And then depending on the outcome of the point, either the challenger or the original cartographer will get their stake back.
Who's the voter?
In this case, the voter is anyone on the map.
On the like a user.
Any user, yeah, any user with foam tokens, and the weight of the prize or the reward that you get is based on the tokens that you use to vote with, and there are no restrictions to voting, and you can even use your tokens multiple times to vote.
Why would this process happen? Like, the Eiffel Tower is not going to disappear, but how would this work?
So there's 2 reasons for normal. Though we have a bunch, and like the good thing is that we have a bunch of like data, so we know why this happens. I don't know if you want to go into, if you remember.
Yeah, we can just give an example. The Eiffel Tower is actually one of the first points removed if we go back in the history of the TCR. I don't know if it was because of this
I think it was, yeah.
image or not, but and the reason is because someone had already added it, and it was a better point. It had a better description. It had better metadata. So the map had 2 Eiffel Towers. One was added later, and it had worse information on it, so it was voted off the map. And then that cartographer's deposit in the point, I think it was like 50 foam tokens or something, was split between the voters and the challenger.
And the reason we see most is either duplicates or bad data.
So a lot of them are just improvements, or like a shop closes and it's no longer there, and then it's challenged on the map.
Yes, that also happens.
Yeah.
But does it penalize the person that adds originally, and then the store closes, and then they lose their stake because the store closed, but originally they provided valuable data?
Yeah, if they leave it on the map long enough for it to get challenged, then they'll be punished.
In the current system,
But
yes.
So they're responsible for their data in the long term. So if you add a shop, you're penalized if you leave it on there and it closes.
In the current model we implemented the TCR 1.0 model largely by Mike Golden, and like a lot of the ad chain developed contracts or like in variation. So we're going to get to improvement proposals in the end. I mean, this is a pretty raw model. It basically is binary. You can't edit. And yes, you are responsible for the thing over time. I think there's room for improvement within certain areas. And I mean, these are things that also come up in the community. But this is the basic model right now, and it has that quality.
One more question maybe. What is the original incentive for the person who puts his tokens to the point of interest? Like if I'm not a store owner or like responsible for the Eiffel Tower, just a person who is interested in form in general, why would I risk my stake?
So this is a great question, right? I mean, there were large calls for like inflationary rewards in the beginning. The problem we had was that it's very easy to game the system. Like you can spam the system with faulty entries. Right now there is no direct incentive, so there's no payment for a valid point. We'll go for, like, we have data to show if this works or not. Right now it's mostly people betting long term on basically improving the network and owning foam tokens. And that's kind of one of the motivators. And we see a number of incentives that maybe aren't all, let's say, rationally economic and short term.
And the more tokens I stake initially, the more valuable or the greater visibility the point of interest has on the map.
So right now we had that as a proposal in the beginning. Right now we had, like, the minimum stake is 50 foam tokens. We've seen, and we can get into that if you stake more, you actually are higher chance to get challenged. So the recommendation is maybe to stay at a minimum. But there is a visibility. So if, for example, we've seen that firms or investors that want to profile themselves stake largely on the map to this kind of a show-off thing. I
mean, they also have enough tokens that they can then vote against any challenge that appears for their point. And so often, you know, these points with a ton of tokens in them will survive multiple challenges in some cases.
I think a lot of these questions will be answered by the data as well, but this is the basic mechanism that we...
Before we dive really into it, could you elaborate on one point that you had earlier, like with the hardware? So now here we use a TCR to actually validate geolocation,
yes.
But with the hardware, you do it with the hardware. So how that goes together in the long term?
Well, I mean, it goes together in that you could validate a claim with the hardware. Like, this is an information entry. The other one is just like a triangulation of a yeah. So you could validate a data entry like this with the triangulation later. So I mean, it complements it, and it like this smaller like deployment allows us to test out a lot of like incentive design and like the front end, and basically we have a lot of like spatial blockchain data that then also prepares us for later deployments with the foam location, which is the larger radio protocol.
Can I?
Oh yeah, several.
What is the factor that determines the voting to end?
Time.
And what happens when no votes occur from the challenge?
Challenger wins.
Yeah? Okay, so it's tilted towards the challenger.
It is at the moment, and in fact, there was a point removed from the map that actually had 55% of people vote to keep the point. So right now the quorum is set at 60%. So for a challenge point to stay on the map, it needs to reach at least 60% of of the votes in that challenge.
So even in the simple case where there's a challenger and only one person shows up to vote no, then it would still be removed.
So it's weighted by the amount of tokens used to vote. So if they had equal amount of tokens, then yeah.
These are all part of the governance parameters that already have deployed smart contracts. They don't have a dashboard yet, and we'll go through that. But basically, these things can already be changed by the community. In theory, there's no, like the smart contracts are at least deployed. So, I mean, the long-term idea is that, and we'll go through that in the end, but that we have a KPI, like a key performance indicator that is bound to the activity that the vote quorum, for example, impacts. And then the community can vote on the on that parameter, basically.
In the example of the two Eiffel Towers,
yes.
Why was one better than the other one? It's like the coordinates were more exact.
I mean, in this case, it was a time, so who was first, and then it was information. So a more fleshed out information layer. So like more information about the Eiffel Tower.
So okay, so in this so you include like metadata about the point of interest.
Yeah.
Well, here, so for example, right, you have this is one point. This is this co-working space. You have tag system. You have you enter basically a lot of information.
Can I also rate the place, the experience? So the token allow me to rate experience as well?
No, but you could build an experience, you could build something on top of this, which would exactly be that. You mean, we see this as, if you want to build something like a rating system, it would be good to have a registry of places on the map that could be used for that, and then you would just add a different solution on top of that. That's kind of like the use case is stuff like that, exactly, like a decentralized rating system for places, for example. And we offer both the front-end solution and the kind of standard for spatial blockchain data, and then also TCR for validating the accuracy, or like at least allowing a higher trust level of validity for spatial data, for the subset of spatial data, which is points of interest. Should we move on to the next part? Okay.
Yeah, one short question. So the cartographer who adds code of interest, can they change the metadata at any point in time, or do they have to go through this challenge?
So the problem right now is you can withdraw and then re-add.
Is there any slashing of the initial stake?
No, there's just a gas cost associated with that. But we're looking, like, one of the improvements by the community is, of course, editing, which is a headache right now. I mean, because of deploying a basic model has given us a lot of, let's say, proven models that we deployed, but it also is very basic in its deployment. And I think as the kind of deployed model improves over time, it will be more fitted to the specific use case based on the community proposals. That's kind of our long-term vision. So we have this kind of rough thing that does what it's supposed to do, but there are, as we've heard, a few sharp edges still.
Is the base data app layer from Google, or is it OpenStreetMap?
So what we're using here is OpenStreetMap and Mapbox. Mapbox uses OSM data. Okay. So what OSM is bad at is POIs. So we're kind of adding a POI layer on top of the OSM layer.
Now within each point is actually its own kind of entity, and each point has a unique listing hash that corresponds to, or that also includes a geohash to get lat long, and also the metadata and an IPFS hash to find the metadata. So the map is using Mapbox, but it doesn't matter what the base is. This information is available on the Ethereum chain directly, and then also the metadata. The text itself is available on IPFS. So it's not like, somehow built into Mapbox. It's truly kind of laying on top of it.
Just the front end part.
Yeah.
And if any information on OSM changes, how does that affect the layers on top?
It doesn't.
Doesn't it?
No. And for like validation of points, could you also just possibly use Street View as a possible way to confirm besides the communication system that you're building?
I mean, people are finding creative ways to validate points and or add points. I mean, we can go through some ways later, because every time you add an incentive, even if it's an NFT badge, people find a way to add a bunch of data, and they find a data source for it that maybe isn't visiting. Well, we can talk about that.
Yeah.
I mean, these are all possibilities, and people do stuff.
Kind of in the open source mapping community, like Waze or OpenStreetMaps, the kind of ultimate source of truth is if you've passed the place, and it's called ground truth. And so, ground truth is supposed to be more valuable than maybe like using Street View or something like that. But that said, in the current kind of registry model, there's no way to validate that somebody has been nearby or lives nearby or whatever the case is. Yeah.
Like a peer-to-peer system.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the exciting things about the dynamic proof of location, which we're not going into today. But if you can prove that somebody has been near this point in the last 6 months, and you require that for them to challenge it, it turns the validation into it gives validation more options, and yeah.
Okay, so maybe we want to move to the next part, which is looking at the performance of this thing. Right? And this is the current state of points added.
Yeah. So I think ignore the colors for now, and we'll come back to them. And I think that the important thing is the growth of points over time, the total. So we're above 9,000 points added at this point. And we'll look at, what happens to those points next.
This is what it looks like currently in Dumbo area, which is maybe one of our more popular. We've done some like small campaigns and stuff like that, which incentivized growth there. This is some distribution across Europe, and this is not a huge data set in terms of like POI data, but it is the biggest TCR that any of us know of with the 9,000 points. We're going to go through what can be learned from this, because we've been able to kind of look at a lot of the assumptions of the TCR model with this data set. And that's kind of what we find interesting about potentially this presentation. Is there something more you want to add to the point performance?
No, that's great. Yeah.
How can we find that map?
This one? You can't yet. It's a very secret map.
Yeah.
That Caleb did last weekend, and it's on his computer. But
did you send that around, or?
I mean, we can send it around soon. You can find all of this. You can find on the map.foam.space, which is important to note. Like, this is all public, map.foam.space, and even without MetaMask, you can just like a normal Google map or a Mapbox, you can just look at this stuff, and all the data is public. And then for interacting with the protocol, you just need MetaMask and foam tokens. I mean, this is, you can look at this stuff already. This stuff is coming soon. You want that stuff? That's coming soon.
You can see me afterwards, and we can look at it. Yeah.
If I could ask a quick question, what is that? Is that like a normalized distribution across all points of number of tokens per POI or something?
Yeah, within a certain area. So I think in this case, each hex column represents something like 2.5 kilometers radius. And so this is the number of POIs within each of those bins.
Okay, so it's not token staked to POIs, it's POIs themselves.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And because the map data is kind of independent from the underlying map, it's really easy to kind of grab all of that data and then just place it on whatever visualization or in whatever tools. Yeah.
And what's maybe important to note also is that while the registry is what we're looking at mainly, the whole thing is usable in open source. So even if you want to build, I don't know, something that doesn't use this registry, you can use the front-end tools and the kind of standards for spatially specific smart contracts or blockchain data. might be interesting to note in a room of half developers or half room of developers.
So what use license do you employ for the data that is essentially for the POIs? Or is it just like fully public domain? It's like finding $5 in the street.
Well, I mean, like finding, there is no, it's on Ethereum. I mean, it's going to be very hard for us to enforce. There's no, it's not a, there's no smart contract where you need to pay to access now. I mean, it's publicly available. The idea is that the financial incentives are based around the curation, not the monetization or the use of it. That's the basic idea. So we don't, yeah, that's it. And you can already use this for whatever you want, and the whole kind of solution can be used for whatever you want. So now we talked about there's been a bunch of points added. The next is maybe talking about how the challenges go, right? If you want to.
Sure. So on this graph, this shows the state of all the points at any given time on the map. And it starts by adding new points, and then either the points are challenged and removed. So going across the top, about 5% of points are challenged. And then of those 5%, about 85% are actually voted off the map and removed from the map. Going kind of on the other side, we have about 11% of them removed by the point owner. And that may be to edit data, or that may be because of some of the incentive mechanisms used to get the points on in the first place, where people actually want to take the point off and reduce their chances of getting a point challenged and their tokens distributed to voters and the challenger. Right. So out of these 9,200 points added to the map, right now there are about 7,800 on the map as an active point. So that's not to say that the data is gone anywhere. All the data about removed points and challenge points and everything is still on the blockchain. It's kind of stuck there. But right now, kind of what we consider active points in the TCR, we have about 7,800. Yeah.
And what that means is basically they have a higher trust level of accuracy by going through this process. You could reference the removed points as well if you want, but.
What is the pending?
Yeah, so pending is maybe you could say it's an artifact of the TCR model that Foam uses, right? So in the Foam map, point is considered pending for 3 days after you add it, and in that time you are not allowed to remove it from the map. So it gives challengers, in theory, enough time to go and find the invalid points and kind of punish people for putting back low quality points on.
Yeah,
spam reduction mechanism. But this is in my opinion, this is a very high number, and it may be implying that to add a point and then come back 3 days later and verify the point is maybe too many steps.
It's also because it adds an extra step on the point creator, because you need to again spend gas on.
Can't really automate it.
Yeah. Well, we've been thinking about there's a proposal for a smart contract that automatically verifies and has basically is funded by Foam or community.
You can also slash it, because then you can spam it again. Right?
Yeah.
Excuse me if that question came already up because I was late. So the second Eiffel Tower got slashed.
Yeah.
Oh, that's bad. All right. Because how do you incentivize people to actually do something if they run the risk? To add a point, if they run the risk that someone else might have added the same thing, but a little better.
Yeah.
That is really for the really relevant point of interest. That would deter me from actually doing it, because I know some nerd will put some more work into it, and then I get slashed. So
I mean
be that nerd.
I know I look like one, but you know what? I don't want to be one.
I mean, I think that the future we all want is that you basically have the ability to. There's a mechanism for editing your own, but also a mechanism for voting for improvements or adding improvements to existing points, so that other people can fill up the data.
My personal experience was that somebody complained about one of my points on the forum, and I kind of, and I think he's based in London, where I'm from. So, I kind of PM'd him, like, you know, I can just take it off. We don't have to go through this challenge thing. Like, why don't I just remove it? But, you know, I still have 2 days left in the pending period. So give me 2 days and then I'll remove it. And I did, and he didn't challenge it. And then he added a great point of, I think it was of Tower Bridge or...
I need to add here that Caleb is not a FOMA employee, but is an original community member, and therefore, yeah.
I'm really lucky to work on FOMA.
Google, for example, has like festivals or like marathons and things like that are clearly temporary. Are you planning for something like that?
You mean temporary points?
Yeah, where when once I set the point, I can already say this is only going to last for 2 days, and then it's no longer a point of interest.
I think that's a great proposal. It's not what we have right now. I mean, it's again, this is a very basic model. I think that has meant that we also could achieve this in a short time, and now it's like having a governance and improvement kind of formal improvement process, which is where the community participates. And things like that would be optimal for that. I'm very happy if you put in an improvement proposal. Okay, what should we move to next for edge cases?
Yeah.
I have a tiny question.
Yes.
How do you differentiate between public and private points and personal information associated with that being on the blockchain?
That's a really good question. I don't know how to answer that, really. I mean, there is, right now, the point adder, it's the basic question of what happens to data if you add it to the blockchain, right? And we're basically an interface for adding data to the blockchain yourself. You have to be responsible for it. We're facing the same legal issues that any kind of, well, MyEthers can, you know, everyone who can interacts with the blockchain does. If you publish copyrighted data, who's responsible, the front end or you?